I'm Jere Gettle from Baker Creek Seed Company, and I started saving seeds as a small child. My parents and grandparents and their parents always farmed and gardened, and so it was basically kind of I grew up gardening, grew up seed saving, always was interested in all the different diversity, the colors, the shapes, the sizes of produce. And I'm going to kind of show you a slideshow here. There I am when I'm about 3 years old in our garden. I grew up in the Boise Valley, actually right across the border in Oregon, right on the Idaho-Oregon border. And my parents and grandparents, like I was just saying, grew lots of different produce, actually about 2 or 3 acres every year or more, several hundred different varieties of vegetables and fruits. So I guess the interest in seed saving came really early for me, especially squash. As you can see here, as a small child, I grew up basically in a big squash patch, but it wasn't just squash. We had flowers and vegetables of every type. That's me after we moved to Missouri with one of our old-time Tennessee cantaloupes. It's a really big variety that is popular through Tennessee and also even in other parts of the South. They're really large, sweet southern cantaloupes. Basically, as far as the business goes, I started seed saving and collecting seeds as a small child. But I always knew growing up, I got the Gurney's catalog and different catalogs when I was 3 and 4 and 5 years old, and I'd look through them, and it was always my dream to someday, to somehow work for a seed company. So when I was about 17 years old, I sent out our first little price list to whoever wanted it, from ads in farm newspapers and small garden magazines and local papers in Missouri, where I grew up for the last, I've been there since I was 12 for the last 21 years. And that first price list went out to about 550 different people the first year. It was all started on $100 that I'd saved up, and it was started in my bedroom. The next year was 1999, right after I started, and that was right before Y2K. So a lot of people are interested in gardening, and that's really what gave us the big push to really make it a real business. The first year was really slow. We sent out, a few hundred orders, and but I didn't really see how I was going to make it a business. The following year, though, with Y2K happening, it was definitely all of a sudden more than we could keep up with, and it started out in my bedroom, and within about 18 months of when I'd started, due to the help from the year 2000 and people being concerned, it went from my bedroom to the whole upstairs floor of the house, which is about 6 different bedrooms. So it started taking up more space. So that's when we put in the little seed store in the picture here. Another picture in front of our seed store there. We also have festivals and different events at our farm in Missouri. But ever since a small child, I knew somehow, as I would watch in seed catalogs, and I would notice varieties disappearing. And I grew up basically through the 80s and 90s, and it was probably the greatest point in America's history of losing varieties. The old varieties like the banana cantaloupe and the one that I just mentioned, the old-time Tennessee melon, and all these old varieties were all of a sudden, disappearing out of seed catalogs and disappearing out of mountainsides and homesteads across, North America. Fortunately, these Appalachian and Blue Ridge and the Ozark and different mountainous regions were hung on to them longer than most, but people became more and more dependent on, store-bought seed. And that's when I decided, I needed to do something to save these old varieties that have been in my family and other families and that people had given us. So that's kind of what inspired me to start the seed company. And each year since then, it's grown a little, anywhere from, we've grown anywhere from 10 to 15% up to 100% a year. So this current year, we've sent out about 440,000 catalogs across the U.S. and about 150,000 orders this year so far to people from the U.S. and about 60 other countries. And the movement's not only, gaining grounds to save seed in the U.S., but everywhere we go now and travel and talk to people, people are starting to realize that, the impacts of patenting and genetic engineering and the whole business of controlling our seed. People are more and more concerned around the planet that we need to do something to keep the seeds alive and to keep them passing them down to our future generations. I'm going to talk just a little bit about how we grow, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we save seeds, and also a little bit about histories of some of our favorite varieties. As you can see in the picture there, there's some of our rows. Here's another picture of our gardens. What we normally do is we garden pretty simple. We use turkey manure. We put down an inch or two of turkey manure from organic, poultry barns or poultry farms, organic farms in the area. And then we do use drip tape and paper mulch or plastic mulch. We try to avoid plastic mulch, but something to keep the moisture in. Or as we're able, we use straw as we can. That's our favorite, actually. As we can find it. Some years it's easier than others. But just mulching it good and using drip tape really cuts back on our water. It also cuts back on the amount of pests and other problems that we have with sprinkler or above. When you're watering from above, there's always more damage from the humidity, especially in a humid climate like here. As far as pest control, we usually use like something organic, like our favorite probably is spinosad. That's spinosad. But also diatomaceous earth is excellent. We use quite a bit of that as well. And a variety of other stuff like neem oil. The main thing we found with gardening, especially with organic pest controls, is to try a variety of stuff, because some of the stuff isn't real, like neem oil isn't really strong, so it isn't like the commercial stuff that you spray it on and everything is dead on the ground. You got to try a variety of stuff to keep things out of your garden if you're having pests, which most areas in the south, unfortunately, cucumber beetles and squash bugs, tend to wipe out gardens. The other thing is plant a big variety of varieties, especially in crops where you're having pests. In any given year we'll plant around 20 or 30 different summer squashes, and some will make it and some won't, but at least we have plenty of summer squash that way by planting a couple of plants of each variety. The same with cucumbers, and the same in our whole garden for that matter. We plant not just vegetables but flowers, and little patches of this and little patches of that. And it seems to confuse the insects more than planting 1 acre of tomatoes all in one space. You tend to have a lot more pressure from insects if you're growing everything all together. So we tend to mix it up and have a lot more fun doing it that way as well. There's our herb and flower garden as well. And there's some fall greens. There's a lot of different crops, especially for fall planting in southern and Midwestern and Mid-South climates, where you can grow things through much of the winter. Like currently, actually about 2 weeks ago, we started harvesting kale again, and we had 17 below in Missouri last winter. And the kale went through the winter, froze back quite a bit, but it's already producing kale again. So there's a lot of things that farmers and gardeners can produce, even in climates where you get to 0 or below, where you'll have greens for the majority of the year. We grow a lot of greens. They also are great worked into the soil, to make your soil more loose at the end of the year. So that's something we try to plant a lot of. I'm going to go into seed saving a little bit, and first, I'll talk a little bit about the importance of seed saving. Up until about 50 or 60 years ago, everybody saved seed. Everybody can probably remember their grandmother, as long as you lived in the country anyway, or in a small town. Everybody's grandmother pretty much, saved seed. And that's how they kept their petunias alive for the following year. That's how your grandpa kept his corn alive and passed it down from year to year, where he kept the old corn. It might have been Bloody Butcher, it might have been Hickory King or Hickory Cane, it might have been Golden Bantam, but most of the time the farmers kept these varieties alive in their own gardens. It's only been the last couple generations where people have become more and more dependent every year on getting from a seed company. And more, involved with, 1 or 2 or 3 corporations control most of what we eat in this country. So it basically went from, every farmer and every gardener developing seeds and keeping seeds and passing them down through the generations. It's went to, a handful of corporations keeping the seeds. And at the same time, they're developing new varieties and getting rid of the old varieties. So that's why, we feel it's really important that, home gardeners everywhere, whether you're a have 100 acres, or whether you have a patch in the back of your yard in town, there's something you can preserve. Especially look for local varieties right from this region, which is so rich in varieties, both in vegetables and fruits, but also flowers and other crops. If you talk around your neighborhood, if you don't have one yourself, talk to an older person in your neighborhood. It won't take very long to find somebody that has a bean that's been in their family for the last couple hundred years, or a collard, or a tomato. In fact, this is probably the most rich region from here up into Kentucky and Virginia. And this whole mountainous region here is probably the richest area in the United States for old varieties. There's literally hundreds of varieties of beans, hundreds of varieties of tomatoes, localized varieties that may oftentimes be similar to other varieties in the next holler over, but they might be in one holler for the last 100 years and be preserved and saved, and one person has developed them to be more striped and the other person has developed them to be larger or smaller. So hundreds of unique varieties have been developed, and it's exciting, but at the same time most of these old varieties are in danger of disappearing. So what we need to do now is save the seed, and which is a really easy process. If you think about it, you plant a tomato in your garden and say some little cherry tomatoes, or even throw a tomato out in your yard. Oftentimes next spring there'll be little tomato plants coming up. So it's a very simple process. You just got to start doing it and experimenting. The number one thing people probably get confused with, though, is cross-pollination. That's something where a lot of crops will easily cross. For example, corn will cross just by the pollen blown in the wind, which is probably one of the most difficult crops to save seed from, especially if you're in an area where they're growing a lot of corn. On the other hand, crops like tomatoes and lettuce are self-pollinated, which means the male and female part of the flower is in one flower, and it usually pollinates even before the flower opens. So that makes them some of the easiest crops. So if you're a little concerned, start out with easy crops like beans, lettuce, and tomatoes. And also, you can also, as long as you don't have a corn farmer around, corn is super easy, as well as is most other crops, as long as you're not growing lots of varieties. But to start out with, beans are one of the easiest of all. You just simply dry them and save them. On tomatoes, on the other hand, they're also very easy, but there's a few more steps that take place. You basically got to let the tomato, grind it up, let it ferment for about 3 days in a cup or a bottle, and the seeds will sink to the bottom, and you just pour everything off. And the seeds will be at the bottom. You rinse them off, they'll keep sinking, and you just slowly pour off the fermented mixture. And any seeds with pulp, like cantaloupe or cucumber, anything that has a pulpy, juicy area around the seed that doesn't dry clean like beans or corn, oftentimes is fermented for about 3 days. And you just watch them carefully so they don't sprout before you start draining them off. But other than that, that's pretty much all you do. You need to make sure you dry them well, which can take up to 2 weeks, especially in a humid climate. And then just put them in a cool, dry place for storage. The cooler the better. Like oftentimes a freezer will work good as long as the seed is dry. That's the main thing. You need to make sure your seed is dry. And then just put them away. You'll be amazed how long, if the seed is kept dry and cool, how long seed will last. Even at room temperatures, tomato seeds oftentimes will last 10 or 12 years or more. In a freezer, you may have seed that lasts 30 or 40 or 50 years. It's just hard to say because every batch is different, and it's just like anything else that's alive. Some last a long time, and others passes away quickly for some reason. And oftentimes we don't know the reason, but you can get better and better at it by getting better and better. Drying conditions. You don't want to, of course, put your seed away on a day when it's rainy or wet. You want to make sure it's a good dry day and low humidity when you put your seed away. But it's a very, very easy overall process. It happens in nature all the time, and a lot of gardeners just let some seed fall every year, and it oftentimes comes up every year again in your garden. But that isn't 100% foolproof, so it's always best to get a handful over and keep it in your house, because you might have one year where it doesn't show up. We have gardeners that contact us all the time that they were letting something reseed in their garden, and then all of a sudden one year it didn't come up, and then they give us a call for more seed. Since around 1900, the year 1900, America has lost about 90% of all the varieties we had available at that time. If you look through old seed catalogs, especially look at like the cabbage section, some of them had like 45 varieties of cabbage. You look through a catalog today, and the average seed catalog probably has 3 or 4 varieties, and on the average, most of them are hybrid. So it's become a much more, our cabbages, our turnips, a lot of these crops that sustained us have become very underappreciated and very underused, and we've become more and more dependent on, potatoes and corn and things that we make into byproducts. As far as seed saving goes, just start small, but don't be afraid to experiment. It's easy to, it's a very easy process. Start seed saving, start trading, start giving seeds to your neighbors and local community. You'll be glad you did, because even with, with as much seed saving as we do, we still had to go back to other people who are saving seed every now and then. We've made a mistake. For some reason, we had 2 bad years in a row and our seed just won't germinate on a crop. We go back to somebody that's saving it, and it keeps it going. That way a customer can get it back to us, and we can keep the variety alive. The more people that have it, the better on these old varieties. And the other issue that we face is with our corn. We test all of our corn that we grow for genetic engineering and genetically engineered organisms. And over the last 10 years, the different corn farmers that grow for us, they're all small, mostly home gardeners or small farmers on a few acres that grow corn for us. And unfortunately, in the last 10 years since we've been testing our corn, about 50% of all the, not varieties necessarily, but all the crops that come in, about 50% of all the crops that come in each year have some GMO contamination, and we won't sell them if they're GMO contaminated. If it's over a small percentage, you can actually get sued for selling them. Plus, we won't sell them even if it's 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000. We won't sell them anyway, because we don't believe in the whole process of somebody owning our food and the whole issue of them altering our food. So it's become a bigger and bigger issue with our... Thank you. Yeah, it's become a bigger and bigger issue, not only with us, but farmers everywhere. In fact, it's the biggest issue these days with people trying to save seed is the issue of genetic contamination, especially with corn. A gentleman just passed away, and his sister gave us 300 varieties of old corns from Arkansas and the Appalachian regions. There's also some from Peru, and also quite a few Native Americans varieties from the Southwest. So we got varieties with names like Arkansas Dogtooth and so forth and so forth, really old traditional varieties. What's sad and scary is, where do we grow these old varieties out? Because we have farmers in the middle of the Ozarks that don't have, corn farmers for a dozen miles around them. But yet we've had contamination, in the middle of nowhere. The problem is with corn pollen, it's light and it's transferred by the air. So, in a windstorm, which I'm sure you get here in the spring, all of a sudden you have your corn pollen over here in Hendersonville, and you're growing in your garden, and a windstorm comes up or a tornado that we get so many through the Midwest, and it'll go through a field in Kansas and drop pollen, maybe 100 miles away in Missouri. So that's the challenge. And in the humid, wet, damp conditions, the pollen can live for several hours. So, in sunny, hot conditions, it usually only lasts a few minutes. But when a tornado is happening, or when oftentimes a spring storm, even if it's not a tornado, we're having the pollen, it doesn't stay in place, unfortunately. So that's our big issue and our big concern, and we're actually looking for ideas. We're looking at options like hand pollinating, which is tens of times more expensive to produce corn seed than to, just to grow it in a field, of course. But it's becoming, looking at greenhouse production, looking at production in other countries, looking at production on islands, anything we can do to keep the old varieties of corn alive. But it all costs money, and it all takes a lot of extra effort, which we shouldn't have to worry about all these extra efforts. And not only that, it's not only the issue of us getting contaminated and losing the old varieties. That's our biggest fear and biggest concern. The other big concern is, if we're over like 1% or something in that range, we could actually be sued for hundreds of thousands of dollars or more just for having those genes, even though we didn't want them. And the other big problem that's been for us is how to handle these, these growers that grow the corn and then it comes back contaminated. Whose fault is it? That's the other, where did the contamination come from? Those are the big issues that are, affecting small farmers. It's cost our company and the small farmers that are working for us in the last 10 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we're just one small company. If you take this out and think of every, small seed company here at this event, and then every small seed company in the U.S. and every organic farmer in the U.S., this issue is, becoming more and more of an issue, and I don't really have an answer for it. This is something we all need to work with together, though everybody needs to come together. We need to keep fighting, for the right to save seed and for the right to own our own seed, but also looking for a real solution, the logistics of how to keep corn alive in today's age with genetic contamination and patents and corporations. How are we going to keep thousands of years of Native American corn alive, plus all the histories from Appalachia and histories throughout the United States and other countries? How are we going to keep these native parts of our most native part of our North America's food alive? I'm going to do a real quick rundown of some of our favorite vegetable varieties. This is the Malaysian dark red eggplant, and I love eggplant. I know a lot of people either like it or don't, but it's a super easy to grow plant. The only pest that it really has, by and large throughout the country, that it is at least a big pest, is the flea beetle, and that's something that affects not only eggplant but many other vegetables. And the trick with flea beetles, which are super easy to kill, is treat them early and keep, if you're using diatomaceous earth or whatever you're using, hopefully it's something organic or natural, but whatever you're using, apply it often at first. When the plants are small, it's best to apply it every time it rains, if not several times a week, just a light dusting. And before you know it, your eggplant will be outgrowing the flea beetles and they won't bother it much anymore. But just keep up regularly, making sure it's treated the first few weeks up to about the first month or so is crucial with eggplants, and also flea beetles attack many other crops though. But once you're done with that, the heat and humidity and most of the other pests that bother squash and other crops, they're gone. And the nice thing about eggplant, just like most other crops, just like tomatoes, there's dozens of different flavors. Some are sweet and mild, some can be used for desserts. Others have, a strong bitter taste that's often an acquired taste unless you're from an Asian descent. So, but there's every flavor and shape and size, so it's a crop that's easy to use. Here's our favorite squash variety. It's called the lemon squash. And this is a variety I've been growing since I was a teenager, for almost 20 years now, actually. And what really, it looks like a basic the end of a crookneck, but it's shaped like a lemon and about the size of a lemon. And why this variety is popular is, at our place in Missouri, and I'm sure throughout this region as well, squash bugs are the #1 problem with squash. So what we continually search for is varieties of squash which have a hard stem, and that's the most important thing with squash bugs. You plant zucchinis out there, and oftentimes before you know it, the squash bugs come through and chomp down those big, juicy, soft zucchini stems. What you're looking for is stems that are hard, small, and they don't prefer them. You'll get your zucchini for 2, 3, 4 weeks. These you'll have for several months usually, and that's why we really like them. Other than, as far as taste, they taste just like a crookneck or a typical yellow squash. The other thing we found with squash is to plant the squash late. Oftentimes it helps us get by the squash beetles. Like for our winter squash, we'll plant it just about at the 1st of July. So we wait as long as we can and try to plant it away from where we had our summer squash, but plant it as late as you can plant it. And we got beautiful, harvest of winter squash with almost no insect damage and no, really hardly any natural pesticides at all. We didn't really do anything. We just planted it about the 1st of July, and then the 1st of October, just after the 1st of October, beautiful different varieties of winter squash. This variety here, by the way, is one of the oldest ones we carry as far as that actually is documented. We actually have a lot of older undocumented varieties that are Native American and so forth, but this variety has an interesting history. It's called Yokohama, and it was brought to the U.S. from Japan in the 1850s. And it was brought to New York. It has delicious golden flesh. Actually, it was written up in Mother Earth News a few years ago, and it's been written up in New York Times and other magazines, but it has a delicious dry, if you go to an Asian restaurants, they'll have newer forms of this oftentimes today, newer varieties of it, but they tend to have the dry, very meaty, dry flesh that they use in curries and soups. It's very, very thick flesh, but the fruit itself is also beautiful, and almost went extinct. We looked for years to find it, and finally we found it in a French seed collector in France had the seed for it still. The Sikkim cucumber, what many believe may be the original cucumber, original domesticated cucumber. It's from northern India in Sikkim, and it has a brown, rough-looking rind on it when it ripens. The flesh is very sweet and crisper than a normal cucumber, though. And what these were developed for, unlike modern cucumbers where you just pick them and eat them in a couple of days, these will actually last up to 2 months or so. So you have to peel them and you have to take the seeds out. But other than that, the flavor is actually better than the modern cucumber. They're bitter-free in general and very crisp. If you like a crisp cucumber, they're much crisper than what modern cucumbers taste like. They also tend to do really well in the South. This is another variety that's been made popular by Mother Earth News and other magazines and articles as well. It's the little Mexican sour gherkin cucumber. Some places call it the mouse melon. It looks just like a mini watermelon, and it's actually related to the same family as watermelons and cucumbers, but it's a different species. And you use it like a cucumber, and I just like to eat them fresh in the garden, but they're about the size of, a little smaller than a cherry tomato, to about the size of a cherry tomato. And they have a delicious, slightly tart taste. Some people say they almost taste like they've been slightly pickled already. But it's become one of our most popular varieties in the catalog. In part, thanks, NPR did a story on them last year, and it's just become more and more popular. You'll see them in restaurants now. And the nice thing is, a lot of the pests that really bother cucumbers, like the cucumber beetle, are much less of a pest on these. And they're from Mexico, so they do tremendous in our heat and humidity. And then on to watermelons. Watermelons come in so many different colors. We have white watermelons and orange-fleshed watermelons. The variety in the picture with my daughter is an orange glow watermelon. And orange and red watermelons are almost equally popular with our family and also with our customers. A lot of people remember the old orange-fleshed watermelons and yellow-fleshed watermelons, and they become harder and harder to find, especially the seeded ones. You go into a store now, and all the varieties almost are seedless. They may have an orange watermelon, but it'll be a seedless one in general. And the seeded varieties, I don't think in general have as much flavor. Some of them are pretty sweet, but the old watermelon taste just isn't there anymore in a grocery store melon. Even the locally grown ones don't taste the same as the old seeded watermelons. Something happened when they took the seed out of the watermelon. They didn't necessarily lose the sweetness, but they definitely lost a lot of the flavor. And this is the Alibaba watermelon. This one's been in our catalog almost since we started. I think in 1999 was the first year we offered it. It was sent to us by a seed collector from Iraq, and he sent it to us and said that, due to the different wars, a lot of the Iraqi varieties were disappearing, and he wanted us to have some seed of this variety, and he's since sent us several dozen other varieties from Iraq. In the last war, he was sending us things and saying that I just got this from my brother. He says that this is some of the last seed that he knows of. Can you guys keep it going? And we would get, different varieties like that all the time, and that happens today too. We have a lady in Syria for the last 3 or 4 years. Due to the conflict in Syria, she's unable to save seed, and she was a seed saver who collected seeds and passed them, around her community, and had a big garden, but she hasn't been able to get to her garden. It's about 30 miles from her house where she farmed, and she hasn't been able to get there in like 2 years because she's afraid of going out due to the conflict. So she sends us seeds, and we try to keep them alive, and of course, if she ever needs them again or finds a time when her seed doesn't germinate due to not being able to save her own seed, we, of course, resupply seed back to people. So that happens all the time. People are sending us seeds and sending us stories. But this variety, we're always getting things, but this variety is called Alibaba watermelon. And, at one time, supposedly a popular variety in Iraq. And we grew it out thinking we didn't know what to think, but it has become our most popular watermelon. Our employees like it better than any other watermelon in our entire list. It has tremendous flavor, and it's also been rated one of the sweetest and most flavorful watermelons in many different articles and stories that have been written about it over the last 15 years or so. But it also keeps really well, and it grows on a moderate amount of water. It does very well. Compared to most, modern hybrid watermelons or even the older varieties of southern watermelons, the flavor is right in the top 1% of watermelons, I feel, and also our customers, year in and year out, it's been like our #1 full-sized watermelon. Another picture of some of the different watermelons that we grow each year. There's so much difference, in sizes and diversity and colors and shapes. The white watermelons are also really good. They have a more mild flavor, though. They taste more almost like a pear-like aftertaste. And it is interesting, the different colors on every crop, whether it's watermelons or tomatoes or peppers, the different colors definitely have a different taste to them. And after you eat a bunch of different crops with different colors, you start recognizing the similarities. You definitely notice in the orange watermelons, they have, hints of the same flavors that are making the orange and citrus. And you'll notice that in most all the different colors. If you taste, not every single variety, but overall, if you taste a bunch of different colors in a bunch of different types of vegetables, you'll notice these different flavors that are kind of coming out, hints of the different flavors. And that's one of the things that we're also lacking in our diet today is everybody's eating orange carrots versus, all the different colored carrots or one color of watermelon. So it used to be people were getting, a lot more diversity in their diet. And it's not only as far as nutritionally more beneficial, it's also a lot more fun and easy to get your kids to eat vegetables if you have dozens of colors there versus here's your vegetables. The green beans always look the same, this gray-green slop that comes out of a can. It just isn't really appealing to kids. They like to see the purples and the yellows and the bright, flavorful, still crunchy vegetables. Speaking of colored green beans, this is the dragon tongue green bean. I think it's our #2 most popular variety this year. It's an old Italian variety, and what people love about it is that it never really gets tough. I mean, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's still tender. We'll just go out in the garden and bite them off, and they're still tender, even a foot long. They don't really develop a string. Plus, they're a beautiful golden color with various amounts of bright purple mottling over the whole pod. And just delicious flavor, but it's one that we're going to have in our garden, I think, every year from now on because it's just such a tremendous eating green bean. And if you read our reviews online, I think there's like 40 reviews on there right now, and everybody's saying it's like, the best flavor, the best eating. People are just shocked when they actually taste these old varieties. Like this one comes from Italy. I believe originally, though, from South America. So the stories on how these varieties travel is, fascinating. But also, when kids and adults bite into these old varieties, there's no comparison to what you get in a grocery store. Talking about a more local heirloom, this is the old Cherokee Purple variety, which actually, is still popular in parts of this area. You'll see these old purple tomatoes at farmers markets throughout Eastern Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina. People love the old purple Cherokee black, Cherokee purple, various names they call it. But it's the old, dark, rough-looking tomato, but like everybody that has ever had one will tell you, when you bite into one, there's really no taste comparison compared to anything that you can get out of a modern seed catalog. We also did an interesting study this last year. We took about 10 different tomatoes, and we took different colors of tomatoes, dark tomatoes, orange tomatoes, green tomatoes, and red tomatoes, and did a study on nutrition. And almost in every case, the different dark tomatoes, actually black Krim was our number one for the most nutrition, but the dark tomatoes had way more nutrition overall than the modern tomatoes and the yellow tomatoes overall. So when we took a tomato like the black Krim and compared it against just an average vine-ripe store-bought tomato, in some cases it had up to 3 times the nutritional content in some of the categories, anywhere from 50% to like 300 times the nutrition. And so it shows you, it shows us anyway, we felt we're wondering why Americans today are thinking that our nutritional levels just aren't what they used to be. We have to eat more vegetables to get the same amount of nutrients. And I know a lot of people will think, well, that's just the soil. But you plant a modern hybrid tomato that's not developed to take up the nutrients. They're only developed to take up certain nutrients, but by and large, to get hard, to get firm, to ship well. And they are taking up those nutrients very well. But as far as nutrition, they're not taking the same nutrients as a black tomato is taking up. And the black tomato, you can taste it in the flavor. You can taste the difference. The black tomatoes taste much richer than any other tomato category. And that's the other thing to think about when anything in your garden, the vegetables, if your green beans taste bland, you're probably not getting a lot of nutrients in them. And the soil definitely has a lot to do with it. But if you're planting a variety that isn't going to get many nutrients, it doesn't matter how healthy your soil is, you're still going to have a variety that's still going to be mediocre. It might be better, but it's still not going to be the same nutrients as a variety that was developed by a home gardener somewhere to have that good nutrient-rich taste. The violet Jasper tomato, this is our earliest little small tomato, but it's actually a Chinese variety, and they're just a little purplish striped tomato. But it's been very popular for especially gardeners in short seasons because it will produce in about 55 days, and also very productive. Now, I imagine some of you think this picture here that I just put up is tomatoes. It's actually the Korean red eggplant, which in consistency, actually, the red eggplants in consistency and look closer to a tomato than an eggplant, but are actually related to the eggplant and are sometimes slightly bitter, but they're much sweeter than a common eggplant as well. And in places like Italy and much of Asia, they use them to make them into like salsas and pickles. So they're a delicious pickled relish. They're great for relishes. They have just a hair of bitterness, but in pickling and so forth, it takes that out pretty much. But they're much sweeter than regular eggplants, and they have the consistency closer to a tomato. But another interesting crop and very easy to grow. But it adds a whole new dimension and also I'm sure a whole other set of nutrients that isn't showing up in a lot of gardens. Here's a variety we collected. It's the Thai purple eggplant. They're a nice, beautiful lavender little eggplant. Over the last few years, we've took different trips collecting seeds, and we always like bringing back varieties and putting them in our own home gardens, whether it's from here in North Carolina or Thailand or wherever we're at. We're always looking for a new vegetable or flower or something growing along a roadside. This is the biggest eggplant we have. This one's called a swad, A-S-W-A-D. And it's another variety that was sent to us by the seed collector in Iraq. He sent us this variety and said that it was a giant eggplant, and we put it in the ground and thinking we were going to get something the size of Black Beauty or maybe something in that 1 pound range. We thought maybe 2 pounds. Some of these got over like 3.5 pounds, and they're literally like this big. Eggplant's fairly light, so they're literally bigger than a cantaloupe. Your average store-bought cantaloupe. So tremendous eggplants, by the way. Although if you're cutting them into a sandwich or something, oftentimes you got to cut them in half just to get them the right size for a sandwich. But completely bitter-free and completely meaty, even at a really large size, they have very few seeds. And that's the nice thing about the big eggplants. They take a long time to develop seeds, and they take a long time oftentimes to develop bitterness. So especially on a lot of the Middle Eastern varieties and also the Italian varieties and Japanese varieties, unlike American varieties like Black Beauty, which tend to have a bitterness, most Italian and Middle Eastern and Japanese varieties were developed to be bitter-free. So I personally like the bitter eggplants, and I like the sweet eggplants, but a lot of people, that's the thing you hear, is they remember eating Black Beauty eggplants at the grandmother's house, and they didn't like the taste. But American eggplants, for some reason, were never developed to not be bitter. And so a lot of people are turned off by them. But if you're wanting a really good sweet eggplant, the Asian and Middle Eastern and Italian varieties are almost all bitter-free, unless they're the little orange ones that were developed to be bitter. But people in this country, you know, basically only had an eggplant or two, and they thought all eggplants tasted the same. But there's literally, we grow out about 75 varieties every year, and there's literally hundreds and hundreds of varieties, you know, if you travel through anywhere in the Middle East or Asia. This is a crop that everybody needs to have in their gardens. It's a little ground cherry. It's a Native American crop. The Pilgrims used them when they came here. But for myself, there's no better fruit for making a cobbler or a pie. It tastes a little bit to me, a little bit like peach or apricot mixed with pineapple, and a little bit like strawberry. But for making jellies or cobblers or preserves, there's no better fruit. It has the perfect balance of sweet tart. It's nothing like it. I also like eating them fresh. I'll go out and sit in the garden in the summertime and sit on the row and eat them for a half hour or so. This is an interesting crop. It doesn't really have an English name, but it's called lychee tomato. L-I-T-C-H-I, lychee tomato. And it's actually not a tomato at all, but another nightshade family relative that makes a little sweet fruit that actually tastes in between a tomato and a cherry. They're rather seedy, but they also are great for jams and jellies and fresh eating. The plants are very thorny, so some people don't like all the thorns on the plants, but they also produce a very large white, beautiful flower. So we grow a little bit every year, just mostly for snacking. Another crop that most people don't recognize, it's another relative of the nightshade family. This is solanums. It's a relative of the eggplant, but when you cut it open, it tastes just like a melon. A sweet melon-like plant that produces lots of these little fruits. The hard part is most people in the U.S. have a challenge growing them because they tend to like to grow in shorter days. Although last summer we were able to harvest quite a few just in our garden, so some years it will be a little more tricky to grow unless you're in the deep south. It tends to grow best through the winter. Yeah. It's a pepino melon. It's called pepino melon, or again, it's not a melon, but oftentimes referred to as pepino melon or pepino dulce. Another one of my favorite crops to grow, actually, is the radish. And I never really liked the basic spring radish. They didn't have a lot of flavor to me other than a little bit of bite. They don't have a lot of flavor to the way I eat vegetables, the way I think. But the colored varieties, in particular the large pink flesh Chinese varieties, they have a much fuller, sweeter flavor, and they're also they're much less watery. They're much better for cooking, and they're great for pickles, tremendous pickles, but also they're great stir-fried in soups, stews. They taste almost a little like broccoli when they're cooked up, like the stem on the broccoli, but they're not fibrous at all like the stem on broccoli. There's so many ways to cook with them, and also use them raw in salads. They're very crispy. You'll see them on a lot of magazine covers now, every month almost, if you walk into a newsstand now. This is a vegetable that's featured on the covers of a magazine. The different, like Food and Wine, I think the last cover had them on the issue, Bon Appetit and so forth. They're always featuring these as a garnish. The one thing that I'd like to say on the colored radish, this is Chinese red meat, and then there's also the green lobo radish, which is another green flesh radish, which is also tremendous eating. But on these radishes, they don't tend to do well planted in the spring. They do well as a fall planted crop, probably planted in August and harvested in October and November. They tend to go to seed if you plant them in the spring, so you'll want to plant them a little later on. But even the daikon radishes, these are basically variations of the daikon, the big white radish that grows 2 feet. The other nice thing about these big radishes is they break up your soil and they help put nutrients into the soil. You can plant them in the winter, and whatever's left, till them in the spring. They'll make your soil a lot looser, and they'll also help till it up. Some of them will go down, these will only go down usually about 8 or 10 or 12 inches, but if you put in some big daikons too, they'll go down to up to 2 feet, and they'll really loosen your soil a lot. Plus, a great source of animal feed, and if you're hungry in the winter, you can always go dig some up. So it's a great source of nutrients. Plus, the greens are edible as well. You can cook the greens like turnip greens. And again, there's so many variations and vegetables out there to confuse you that you think you're looking at one thing and you're looking at another thing. A lot of people say, oh, that's a beet or that's a radish. But no, that's actually, again, another confusion. This is a turnip. It's the Japanese red turnip. And they'll actually have some red streaking inside. And they'll have a red skin, and their shape is not like a turnip. It's more like a beet. So a lot of gardeners are like, what is that? But it's actually a turnip that tastes better than any other turnip, in my opinion. It's also earlier than any other turnip, and the leaves are better quality than any other turnip, in my opinion. They don't have any of the hairy kind of little prickliness that a regular turnip has. They're smoother, and they're more like, almost more like Swiss chard in flavor than turnip. They're I like turnip greens, but these are much better than your average turnip, much more refined, and they're the only turnip that does well for us as a spring planted turnip. All the turnips do great fall planted, but most of the turnips for us get hot and pithy and try to go to seed really quick if we plant them in the spring. They don't make a nice root for us in Missouri where we garden. So this is one of the few turnips that will do super spring or fall. As far as the big purple tops and the white globes and the yellow turnips, plant those in the fall and you'll get a great harvest of turnips. But for a spring harvest turnip, these can be planted any time. The other thing my family does, as I was just mentioning slightly, is seed collecting, both in the U.S. and beyond. And we have other people that work with us that collect seeds as well. This is my daughter in the foreground there, and we're in a hill tribe area in northern Thailand. We were there about a year ago, and it's just amazing to go out to meet, especially in the mountain areas where people are kind of out of touch of modern society. There's areas like that here in the Appalachians where you can go out and find somebody, still planting potatoes with the plow and a horse or a mule or an ox. And you go out and talk to these farmers when you see them, if you can find them, and hear their stories. It's tremendous, whether you're here or in Thailand. The people that gave us these squash here had just got out of church. We were driving through there a Sunday afternoon about 1 o'clock, and they were going out to harvest lunch. They were going to cook lunch, and we stopped, and we had a friend with us that knew Thai, and he also knew a little bit of some of the hill tribe languages that they spoke there, and he was asking them why they grew these varieties, and they were wanting to know why we were interested in them, because they thought coming from America with all the improved seeds, we wouldn't be interested in their old, unimproved traditional varieties, but they were excited to get us seeds, and the whole family started looking for the best squash for us to have. And anyway, we asked why they grew this variety, why were they still growing this and not the modern hybrid varieties, because they could get some hybrid seed if they wanted and put it out. They said the reason was because they could grow this variety without any pesticides. They said all the new varieties from America, they had to put lots of pesticides on. But they just grew this one out in the woods and in the weeds, and they didn't have any pest problems. And that's, one of the whole reasons why we keep looking for new seeds, besides the stories and the fun of introducing people to varieties that they might remember, is being able to find varieties that are severely, have severe, extreme pest resistance. A lot of the varieties in tribal areas where they've been growing them for hundreds of years, if they didn't have pest resistance, they wouldn't have kept growing them. And that's, one of the things we look for, especially in the mountainous areas, both here and beyond, is look for varieties that have resistance. The other thing, we do when we find varieties is oftentimes we'll bring a variety back and we'll get it in our catalog and we'll have somebody call us. We've had a gentleman, for example, a couple of years ago that had arrived to the U.S. from Japan, and he'd been looking for the Shishigatani squash. It's an old, wrinkly, really great tasting old squash variety from Japan that has been growing there for about 300 years. But he'd been looking for it in Japan where he was at, and he wasn't able to locate any. He'd been looking, he'd remembered his grandparents and parents growing it, but he hadn't seen it since like the 50s. And he got to the U.S. and found it in our catalog, and he was like almost crying on the phone because he was so excited to find it. Then we've got varieties like a local variety for us is called the Millionaire tomato. And we would have different gentlemen that used to work in the canning industry. This was a variety in Missouri's canning industry. Well, when we still had one in the 50s, they would can this variety and they would remember growing it and taking it in with their parents and grandparents. But now, they couldn't find it, and so they would come in and ask us if we had it. For years, we didn't have it. Finally, a seed collector in Canada who had got some seeds from just down the road for us about 15 years earlier had saved some seed and had it in Canada, and they sent us some seed back. And thankfully, we were able to get it in the catalog, but there's been so many people that have came in the seed store and come in and tell us different stories about this variety and memories they have. And that's what makes, seed saving fun, is hearing these memories, the stories of these old farmers with their grandparents, what they did with the varieties, and also all their stories of searching for the variety. And many times, every week you'll find people that come into the store that are literally crying because they found something they remember their grandparents or parents having, or something they remember as a child. And that's what makes the whole seed saving. It's so much different than, corporate supplied seed that comes to you with a number instead of a name. You get it as a number, and it comes with a 25 or 30 or even 100-page patent that comes with it, and you have to sign the patent, which basically gives them rights to come on your farm anytime, day or night, in order to plant their seed. You also got to sign up oftentimes to plant their chemicals in order to plant their seed. And there's so much difference when you're working with home gardeners and people that actually care about the seed and not in it for just a profit. They're actually in it because they love to grow seed and love to pass on seed and see seed as something that passes on from one generation to the next. It isn't something that we patent and control. It's something that if you get a seed from us or you get a seed from the seed company over there that has heirlooms or over there that has heirlooms, you can take it, you can sell it, you can grow it, you can throw it away, you can give it to your kids, you can send it to Mexico, you can do whatever you want with it. And that's the way seeds have always been. They've traveled, they haven't stayed in one place. We were just in Hawaii, and there was a guy there with sweet potato collection in a botanical garden, and there was a local Hawaiian name, and when he got it translated, the name meant something like from the mountains in Utah. And so anyway, there's a large population of Latter-day Saints there on that island in Oahu, and he figures that variety was actually brought over with the Latter-day Saint missionaries sometime in the 1850s, translated into Hawaiian, and everybody thought it was a local Hawaiian variety, but it was actually a variety that came, of course, not native to Utah, because sweet potatoes aren't native there. It had to come from somewhere else. But that's how these stories just keep growing and growing and growing. They become a piece of local history and a piece of personal history and a piece of history for our kids and our grandkids and so forth to pass on and keep connecting. And the stories are almost as important as the varieties themselves, passing these stories on, keeping them alive. I did bring a few catalogs. I don't know if there's any left. I had some over there, but feel free to go online to our website, to rareseeds.com, or like us on Facebook if you would, and we'll be glad to send you a catalog out, or send me an email or whatever. But appreciate y'all coming out, and feel free to ask me any questions as soon as we're done here. Thanks a lot. Thank you.